Join me on a 1,500-mile road trip in this fully built Tacoma on portals as I take it back to be part of our booth at Overland Expo and also add some mods to make this thing even more insane. I'm driving all the way from Seattle to Denver. I took a flight to Seattle, picked up the truck, and immediately put it on a ferry. This was my very first time on a ferry, and fittingly enough, the boat was called the Tacoma. I put a Tacoma in the Tacoma, and I left really close to Tacoma from Seattle to Bainbridge Island. The city of Tacoma actually has a lot to do with the history of the Puget Sound area as well, which I'll dive into because I'm going to talk about some of the history on these places that I have never been before. I didn't have much of a solid plan other than to kind of wing it, download my Onyx off-road maps of the areas I'd be around, and then see where that led me. So the first thing I did was drive around Bainbridge Island and explore the land a little bit, stopped by a sporting goods store. A Jetboil's like the best thing you could possibly bring with you. It's so freaking easy to use. Now, Bainbridge Island was really beautiful, and it's an interesting little place that was the land of the Suquamish people who lived there on the shorelines for thousands of years, relying on the salmon runs and shellfish. The Chief Seattle, which is the city's namesake, was a Suquamish person, and he actually lived part of his life here as well. During the 1800s, the European settlers arrived, and this island became a major hub for logging, shipbuilding, and later for strawberry farming by Japanese immigrants up until World War II. And unfortunately, in World War II, Bainbridge was the first community in the US to have Japanese Americans that were forcibly removed from the Executive Order 9066. Where we put Japanese people in internment camps. So dark time in history, and there's a lot of dark history in this beautiful area. It's kind of a weird dichotomy of just natural beauty and dark human history coupled in with it. I'll talk some more about the whole area and smelting and its relation to causing some funky things to go on around here. But nonetheless, I was really interested in driving on the longest floating bridge in the world because it connects Bainbridge Island to Port Townsend. Performance-wise, this vehicle is just an incredible piece of machinery, and we're very fortunate that people trust us to do builds like this on their vehicles. In fact, this customer we had never even met before. He saw a build breakdown video that's on this YouTube channel that you're watching right now, and contacted me. We had a chat about what he wanted to do and about the budget that he had, and he decided to ship us his truck. This is last year, and we did the build. He's driven all the way across the country several times, and I decided to go pick this up for him and really just give this truck a good shakedown and make sure that everything is in proper working order, be able to provide suggestions on other modifications to make or improvements that we could make in dialing this thing in, and that's what we achieved. So we are going to do a long range fuel tank in this. We're going to replace the stock lower control arms. We're going to boot the steering rack because the Pacific Northwest is not easy on metals that are just exposed. So specifically these inner tie rods on the steering rack need to be covered and protected. And then we're also gonna put in some hammer hangers in the rear and replace the leaf springs with an upgrade so that they are not frowning anymore. The hammer hangers will put them in a better position as well to get more wheel travel. And just a couple other little nuanced things that we're gonna dial in. The sun was starting to go down as I arrived in Port Townsend, but what an awesome town. Just beautiful old Victorian artist town that was originally slated to be the San Francisco of the North until the Northern Pacific Railroad decided to skip Port Townsend in favor of Tacoma, Washington. So what looked like it was the beginnings of a boom town was a huge bust, and there was a crash. But despite that crash, the town remained relevant because it was a big fishing hub, and there were a lot of shipbuilders there. And the most interesting thing to me was that it was a huge part of Prohibition. So this became like a little underground gangster hub for alcohol smugglers during Prohibition in America. Come around to the 1970s, a whole bunch of hippies made their way to Port Townsend and kind of revitalized this old Victorian style town to make it what it is today. It's full of artists and kind of modern day hippies out here, and it just has a really chill vibe. I really like Port Townsend a lot. If you're ever in the Pacific Northwest and Washington, Puget Sound area, don't skip Port Townsend, and particularly do not skip Fort Worden, which is where I decided to sleep. Fort Worden is an old base that is just absolutely gorgeous. The buildings on it, the landscape around it, it's unlike anything I had ever seen before. There's actually a lot of whales in the area and orcas that are just right off the coast. This was a strategic defense position that was built between 1898 and 1920. It's one of 3 forts that was built together with Fort Casey and Fort Flagler, which became known as the Triangle of Fire. They created overlapping fields of artillery that they could fire across the inlet to protect Puget Sound from any enemy ships. Now, this fort never saw any actual battle, just like every fort that I've ever seen. I don't know of many coastal forts that ever had to do anything. But in World War II, it became a training center and provided housing for troops. And in the Cold War, it transitioned to a radar and communications hub before it was decommissioned in 1953. And then in 1973, Washington turned it into a state park, and its Victorian-era houses are still intact. It's really just a beautiful area. It's been used in movies. It's easy to see why. The lighthouse on the end of Fort Worden is a particularly beautiful sight to see, and you should definitely not skip Fort Worden. When I woke up from Fort Worden, I got on another ferry and enjoyed the beautiful views of the islands, but I had another particularly cool driving experience in mind here, and that is Deception Pass. This one struck me really hard. It was so much more beautiful than I expected it to be. Even after the bridge, when you kind of wind down and you're really close to the water, it's just absolutely amazing. I saw 2 fighter jets while I was driving and approaching Deception, and just the landscape is unbelievable. I think it's the coolest bridge I've ever driven on, and Colorado has some really neat ones too, but George Vancouver actually named Deception Pass because he felt deceived by the geography, and what looked like a bay turned into a strait as he was exploring this area in 1792. His officer, Joseph Whidbey, charted the passage, and the name stuck. I always seem to find the dark history of the places that I visit, and even Deception Pass has a past. In the early 1900s, this was actually a convict quarry. So basically, prison labor ran camps, and it was all murderers, thieves, and other convicts that were forced to hack the sandstone and granite out of the cliffs for Seattle's roads and buildings. Some tried to escape, and there's a bunch of whirlpools in the area, and a lot of prisoners drowned while trying to escape this forced labor camp. Now, the bridge was built during the Great Depression in 1935. It was one of Washington's first New Deal infrastructure projects. This bridge is phenomenal. I think that the New Deal that created so many cool landmarks in the U.S. Was a great thing. I wish we'd do more cool infrastructure things like this instead of just being like basic and boring. Seems like government-funded things these days are not anything near how cool they were in the early 1900s, and a lot of them are still standing from, well, I guess the mid-30s. From Deception Pass, I just headed east. I drove all the way across Washington. I'm gonna skip a lot of stuff here. And as night fell, I was approaching Idaho. I planned on sleeping there. I wanted to go to Lake Coeur d'Alene, and I like to listen to signs that the universe gives me, because as I was driving, I put on the Joe Rogan podcast. Surprise, I like Joe Rogan. He had a guest on that was talking about the link between smelting, which causes lead poisoning, and there seems to be a very, very strong correlation between smelting, lead poisoning, and serial killers, specifically and strongly in the Pacific Northwest. Now, I had just gone through the whole Puget Sound area, and as this woman is talking to Joe Rogan, she's mentioning all of these islands I just went to. She's talking about literally where I was the whole time. She's talking about Seattle, Tacoma, Puget Sound. And now she starts talking about how it even spread into Idaho, and specifically Lake Coeur d'Alene. And I'm not kidding you, when she said Lake Coeur d'Alene, I saw the sign for Lake Coeur d'Alene. And she was talking about how there is soot covering a large amount of smelting remnants, essentially terrible lead poisoning in Lake Coeur d'Alene. So you know what? I decided to just push past Lake Coeur d'Alene, but I needed to sleep, so I found a place on my Onyx off-road map just outside of Missoula, Montana. So I did push through for about another 2-hour drive, and it was a spectacular campsite. I got really lucky on Onyx. This is my first time in Montana. I need to plan a trip just to come to Montana and explore on my own, because check out Onyx around the Missoula area. There's so many trails, there's so many campsites. It feels like you could just explore for days and days without seeing another human. It's vast, expansive, and just gorgeous country. And there's no wonder why people who live in Montana are like, do not talk about how awesome Montana is. They don't want the population to grow anymore. And I don't blame them. This is really a beautiful area. It's probably my favorite campsite that I had the whole time. I was up on the side of a mountain and I didn't see anybody. I could literally just hang out here and enjoy nature for a long time, but I had to keep on pushing, so I started my drive back down. This is probably the most like off-road that I did on this trip. I'm not gonna go smash a customer's truck on any actual trails. This is just like fire road status. This truck on portals can do way more than handle this. This was absolutely nothing for these 37s and 74-weld portals. I think it's really important for me to note that you can't do this with most builds of this magnitude that are this capable off-road. And the way that we achieve this by making a truck that's literally capable of being in the classification of like a rock crawler build, but it can still drive and cruise at 85 easily on the highway, is only possible because of 74-weld portals. These are the best mod you can make on any Toyota platform, and in my opinion, if you're interested in maintaining IFS characteristics, you still want to be able to off-road aggressively, and you want to be able to cruise at 85 on the highway and not worry about your IFS driving characteristics being impacted in a negative way. This thing just feels stock. One of my other favorite mods on this vehicle is the Procharger supercharger. It sounds like a damn spaceship. In fact, when I was waiting for the very first ferry that I got on from Seattle to Bainbridge Island, a guy who happens to be a shipbuilder out in Bainbridge, which is funny because historically that whole area is known for shipbuilding and people are still doing it at a high level. He heard the truck just idling and he came up to me and said, "How come my Tacoma doesn't sound like your Tacoma?" And we made friends. Super cool guy. The Procharger doesn't just sound cool though, it feels really awesome. It does deliver 40% more horsepower than a stock 3rd gen Tacoma engine. And this truck just drives surprisingly like a stock truck for being on 37s and having all this weight on it. It's really kind of an incredible build. Back to business on this road trip thing. We are approaching Yellowstone National Park. Since I had limited time in Yellowstone, I had to choose 2 places that were just must-sees and then kind of deal with whatever remaining time that was left. The first one I chose is at the north end of the park, which is called the Norris Geyser Basin. The Norris Geyser Basin is the hottest and oldest thermal area, and a whole bunch of the pools are actually above boiling point at this elevation, which is like 200 degrees Fahrenheit. It's completely insane. And in fact, there was a hole that was drilled at just 1,000 feet below the surface, and is the highest temperature ever recorded in any area of Yellowstone, which was 459 degrees. That's only 1,000 feet below the surface of the earth. Just really insane. It's located on the north rim of the Yellowstone caldera. The Norris Geyser Basin is massive. It's over 800 acres and it's very kind of distinct looking. I don't think there's another place on earth that looks like this, smells like this, feels like this. It's kind of eerie when you're there. Like, I can't even describe the feeling. And there's all sorts of public areas that you can walk around. The Porcelain Basin and Back Basin loop together through these hot springs and mud pots with a bunch of geysers all around you. And you can just walk around these wooden kind of walkways that they've built. There's a lot of tourists here, yes, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it is completely surreal. It is a must-see. If this isn't on your bucket list, it needs to be. There's a reason why Yellowstone is the most heavily trafficked national park in the US. There's a reason why it was the very first national park created in the US. And I think that the Norris Geyser Basin is a big reason why. I headed to the south end of the park after exploring the Norris Geyser Basin, which I'll be honest with you, I didn't even want to leave that area. I need to spend at least a week in the park in the future and just be able to explore, see wildlife, camp. It's kind of a shame that I only had like half a day to come here. But you know what I had to do? I really wanted to go see Old Faithful. That is on pretty much the opposite end of the park towards the south exit. And it's just the most beautiful drive I've ever taken in my life, because it looks like you're just in a scene of a movie on every single turn. And the river going through there is spectacular. And then all of a sudden you pop up on seeing a geyser spitting on the side of the road. So it's unlike anything. But Old Faithful was really the highlight of the entire day. I arrived at the parking lot where Old Faithful is, and there's a whole bunch of buildings, gift shops, you know, there's a whole bunch of activity. This place was packed. There's still plenty of room to get there. I think there were probably about, if I had to guess, 400 people gathered around Old Faithful. And I pulled up, and within 10 minutes, it started erupting, and it was just spectacular. It lasted a long time. It shot up over 100 feet tall, and it's one of the coolest things I've ever seen in nature. So I'm extremely excited that I got to see Old Faithful go off, and it was fun. The crowd was cheering. I didn't think it could get any better than Yellowstone, and I don't know if it can, but coming out of the south entrance was just as exciting as anything I did on any trip in my life, because you basically are tossed from Yellowstone National Park directly into Grand Teton National Park, and you start off with hitting Lake Jackson immediately, which is the most beautiful lake I've ever seen in my life. I ended up finding just a spectacular campsite with a view of the Tetons that I think is unmatched by any other place that you can just camp in a dispersed area. These peaks rise 7,000 feet above the valley, and there are no foothills. So it's just like, boom, all of a sudden, these massive peaks are there. And early trappers and settlers were stunned by their shapes, and the French named it Les Trois Tetons, which means the three breasts. Homesteaders arrived in the late 1800s, and they carved ranches into Jackson Hole, and the valley became famous for rugged cowboy culture. The Grand Teton National Park was established in 1929, which provided the protections that it has today. And that was expanded in 1950 to include Jackson Hole. Both of these areas are considered a massive conservation triumph, and it's a reminder of the tension between development and preservation. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that want to go in and develop this area, but say what you will about wealthy billionaires and whatever you want to say about making too much money, a lot of people do the right thing with their money. In this case, it was John D. Rockefeller that bought up a ton of the land in the Teton National Park area, and his plan was to donate that land to the Park Service. So the locals may have resented it, and they thought that they were going to lose their ranching rights, and there was a lot of tension between them, and they called it a land grab at the time. But to people like me who enjoy outdoor recreation and being able to share this beautiful land and believe firmly that there should be a lot of public lands that are protected so that we can continue recreating and enjoying this Absolutely beautiful country. I don't care about the developers. I'm stoked that we have national parks. I'm stoked that there are public lands in this country, and we need to do everything we can to protect them, fight for them, maintain them, and make sure that that right doesn't go away for future generations. Now, after all the drama of Yellowstone and the Tetons, much of the rest of Wyoming just feels desolate and boring, quite frankly. There's just a bunch of sagebrush basins and wind. You just see tumbleweeds, wind. It's hard to drive. If you ever go west through Wyoming, that headwind can be insane. But overall, guys, this truck did an incredible job getting me from Seattle to Denver. And for the level of functionality that it has off-road, the way that it drives on-road and the highway is just kind of the best of both worlds. So we do tend to build trucks like that. Colorado-style built off-road trucks, in my opinion, are like Swiss Army knives. So they may not be the absolute best thing for one use case. For instance, it is not the best thing on the highway. It is not the best camper. It is not the best off-road rig, but it's pretty darn good at all three of those things. We're gonna have another video out very soon doing a walk around on all of the rigs that we brought to Expo. So be on the lookout for that, and consider liking and subscribing below. I'm gonna do my best to start putting out some content more often. So I'm gonna do more run and gun style stuff. I'm gonna do more trips, and I'm gonna be in Montana with Toyota at the Overland Ranch in just 2 weeks. So be on the lookout for the content coming from Wild Montana with Toyota USA. And then right after that, we have SEMA. We have more exciting builds happening all the time here at Mountain Yotas, and we're moving into a new building that is phenomenal. Here's a sneak peek at the new shop. I wanted to kind of share that with you guys if you made it this far in the video. Thank you so much. If you have anything Toyota off-road related that we can help you with, don't hesitate to reach out. Call us, send us a message, visit mountainyotas.com, at MTN Yotas on Instagram, and just give us a Google if you need to get a hold of us. Drop a comment below, and we look forward to helping you. Thanks for watching.